I had just pulled the zipper closed on my travel bag when the quiet of the cabin shifted like the air itself had stopped moving. 6 months away from home. 6 months of healing after that stupid fall on the back porch, and I finally felt steady enough to return. My cousin had hugged me goodbye that morning, promising she'd visit soon. I told her I'd call when I got in. I meant it. I truly believed this was going to be a simple, peaceful trip back. I reached for the doorknob. My phone rang. Nate's name flashed across the screen. My sweet, gentle Nate. Only 6. Always calling to tell me about the turtles he drew or the puzzle he finished. I answered with a smile already forming, but the voice on the other end wasn't excited or bright. "Grandma," he whispered, breath shaking. "Don't come back. Dad said tonight's the night you disappear." I stopped moving. Every muscle locked, as if my body already knew something I hadn't caught up to yet. The cabin was so quiet I could hear the tick of the old clock on the mantel. Nate's breathing filled the space between us, fast and frightened. "What do you mean? Sweetheart?" I managed, though my throat had tightened. "He was on the phone," Nate said. "He thought I was asleep. He said you wouldn't see it coming, and that everything would be over by morning." For a second, I wondered if I'd misheard. Maybe he misheard. Maybe no. I knew my son's temper, his impatience, the way he snapped when life didn't bend the way he wanted. But disappearing, over by morning, that wasn't frustration. That was intent. My fingers trembled around the phone. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, careful not to make a sound, afraid my own voice might give away the fear building in my chest. "It's okay, Nate," I whispered. "You did the right thing calling me." But as soon as I said it, I realized I didn't know what right even meant anymore. I looked at my packed bag, at the door I'd been ready to walk through, and understood I couldn't go home. Not yet. Not like this. I had to find out what my son was planning before I took another step toward that house. I didn't tell Nate I believed him. I couldn't, not yet. I needed to be the steady one, the calm voice, even if my heart was pounding. I told him I loved him, to stay close to his room, and to keep his little flashlight in his backpack, just like we practiced for storms. As soon as we hung up, I called Georgia. She answered on the second ring. "Merelda," she said. Surprised. "I was just thinking about you." "When are you coming home?" I hesitated. "I need a favor. Could you take a quick look at the house for me?" Just from the sidewalk. "Something doesn't feel right." Georgia didn't ask why. That's the kind of neighbor she'd always been. 20 minutes later, she called back. "Well," she said carefully, "your house looks fine. No broken windows, no lights left on, but the porch chairs are gone." "Gone." "Yep, and the mailbox, it doesn't have your name on it anymore." "Says the Vaughns?" She paused. "You didn't hyphenate with Alan, did you?" "No," I said, stomach turning. After we ended the call, I pulled my travel folder out of the suitcase and laid everything flat on the kitchen table. Receipts, doctor forms, a grocery list, and then a manila envelope Alan had handed me 6 months ago, back when I'd been groggy from the hospital and barely standing. "Just utility stuff," he said. "Temporary, while you're away." I unfolded the first document. It looked harmless: account access for electricity, internet, insurance. I flipped through until I hit page 5. Co-ownership adjustment, effective immediately. My name was there. So was Alan's. I kept reading. The signatures looked familiar, but not identical. Not mine. At least not the way I'd ever written it. My hands went cold. Somewhere between pain meds and misplaced trust, I had handed over half my house. I pressed the paper flat with my palm, then reached for my phone again. If Alan could twist one form, he could twist more. I needed someone who knew how to untangle lies dressed up in legal ink. Janelle picked up on the first ring. Same voice, Same sharp energy I remembered from night shifts 20 years ago. "Merelda," she said. "Well, this is a surprise. You okay?" "No," I said, quieter than I expected. "I think Alan is trying to get rid of me. Legally." I didn't sugarcoat it. There was no time for that. She didn't laugh. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Start from the beginning." So I told her about Nate's call. The mailbox, the missing porch chairs, the fine print I never noticed. She let me speak without rushing. When I paused, she only said one thing: "I've seen this before. More than you'd think. Sons, daughters too, sometimes filing behind their parents' backs. Claiming instability. Early dementia. Makes it easier to move assets." A chill moved down my arms. "I'm not unstable, Janelle. I know that," she said. "But paperwork doesn't." Within minutes, she was typing. I could hear her keyboard clacking on the other end. She had access to county databases. Records I wouldn't know how to find if I tried. "Okay," she muttered. "Let's see. Property adjustments. Filed 6 months ago. Just after your hospital stay." I closed my eyes. "And here we are," she added. "Application submitted to Sunhaven Transition Center. Intake packet completed. Preferred admission date listed as next week." I opened my eyes again, staring at nothing. "Who submitted it?" She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Alan Vaughn." I didn't speak. My heart had started pounding in a different rhythm. Heavier. Slower. "There's a signature," she continued. "But it's off. It's not mine." I didn't think so. The silence stretched. Then she cleared her throat. "Do you want to stop this now or wait for him to try again?" I stood up from the table, legs shaky but working. "We stop him now." Janelle exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for a while. "Good. Then I'm coming over. And we start with your power of attorney." I waited until the sky began to shift. Dusky and soft. Then I dialed Nate again. He answered in one ring, whispering like last time. "Hi, Grandma." "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. "I just wanted to ask, do you still have your backpack ready? Like we practiced?" "Yes," he whispered. No pause. No doubt. That alone steadied something inside me. "Good boy," I said. "And remember, only open it if something feels wrong. Like you told me last night. There was a small breath on the line. Dad locked your room?" My heart dropped. "Which room?" "Baby, yours," he said. "He told me I wasn't allowed to go in. And he said never touch the shelf." I closed my eyes. That shelf. It had sat above the old dresser since the day Joseph and I moved in. On it a small carved box with a brass clasp. I hadn't touched it in years, but I knew exactly what was inside his will. The original deed, our joint savings information, and a few old photos he couldn't bear to store away. It wasn't just sentimental. It was proof of everything. "Nate," I said carefully. "Is the box still there? I don't know. I didn't go in, but I saw him take something down from the shelf. I think he put it in the drawer." My mouth went dry. If Alan found that box, he had everything he needed to keep up this story, to twist facts into fiction, to paint me as confused and give himself control. And if he hadn't found it, then it might be the one thing still working in my favor. "Can you do something for me?" Just when it's safe, I asked. "Look through the drawer. If the box is still in the house." "That matters." "Okay, Grandma." His voice was small, but it was sure. I ended the call and reached for my coat. Janelle was on her way. But I needed to be ready before she arrived. We weren't just fighting paperwork anymore. We were fighting time. I drove with the headlights off for the last stretch, letting the street lamps guide me. The clock on the dashboard read 4:20 a.m. when I parked 2 blocks from the house. The quiet of the neighborhood felt different, tense, watchful, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Georgia was already waiting near the side fence, a coat thrown over her nightgown. She held up the spare key I'd given her months ago, just in case, and pressed it into my hand without a word. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "I need to see," I whispered back. We didn't speak again. I moved along the fence, keeping to the shadows, pausing only when a porch light flicked on across the street. When everything stilled again, I slipped through the side gate and crept toward the entrance Alan rarely used. The key slid into the lock smoothly. No alarm. No creak. The house accepted me the way a body remembers an old rhythm, even if the heart inside has changed. Inside, it was cold, not from the weather, just cold. Alan and his wife were asleep upstairs. The door to Nate's room was cracked open, and the soft hum of his air purifier drifted out. I stood there a moment, letting the sound steady me. Then I went to my room. The door was locked. Just like Nate said, I used the second key I'd hidden behind the porch beam years ago. It fit. Though the lock scraped as if it had been tampered with, the shelf was empty. Everything I'd kept tucked away for decades, Joseph's will, our deed, certificates, the old bank forms gone without a trace. In their place sat a manila folder. Transition plan. Morel de V. My stomach clenched. I opened it slowly. Inside were photocopies of my birth certificate, fabricated medical summaries describing declining memory, and a glossy Sunhaven brochure with my name typed neatly in the admission box. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I simply took out my phone and photographed every page, every timestamp, every forged note. Then I closed the folder, locked the door behind me, and walked out before the sun began to rise. Janelle showed up at the cabin just after sunrise, still in her work scrubs, hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn during every night shift we survived together. She didn't ask whether I'd slept. One look at my face told her the answer. "Let's go," she said. And that was enough. The county office was nearly empty when we arrived. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the waiting room chairs looked smaller than I remembered. We approached the clerk's desk, and Janelle did the talking professional tone. Badge turned outward, vocabulary sharp enough to cut through red tape. "We need to review filings made under this name," she said, sliding forward my driver's license. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, typed for a long moment. Then he frowned. "There are quite a few documents here." He printed a stack so thick the tray rattled when it landed. Property amendments, medical affidavits, guardianship requests, healthcare directives I had never heard of, emergency evaluations suggesting confusion, cognitive decline, instability, all under my name. I sat there staring at the ink. My own signature staring back in distorted imitations, letters too looped, slants too straight. A version of me someone had practiced, but never perfected. "These aren't mine," I said quietly. The clerk nodded. "They don't match the signature on your license. Not even close." Janelle leaned in, voice steady. "We need to freeze all transfers immediately." He clicked a few keys. "Done. We're revoking any power of attorney on file," she continued. "Revoked. We're filing a fraud and elder abuse report." He hesitated only a second before nodding. "I'll enter it. And we need a flag placed on the minor child. Nathan Vaughn," she said. "Risk of unlawful relocation." The clerk's eyebrows rose, but he entered it without argument. When it was over, he handed me a stamped packet of temporary protections pages covered in official seals, signatures that finally belonged to the right hands. "This will hold things in place," he said, "at least until a judge reviews it." I folded the packet carefully and slipped it into my bag. Now that the law had finally heard me, the next step was confronting the house that no longer felt like mine. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the sky had already deepened into a heavy, gray dusk. The officer beside me adjusted the file under his arm. Court order. Signed. Badge polished. Expression unreadable. I didn't say a word as we stepped onto the front porch I hadn't stood on in half a year. Alan opened the door. Surprised, but not alarmed. That told me everything I needed to know. "Mom," he said, blinking like he couldn't place my face. Behind him, his wife came into view on the stairs. Arms crossed. "You don't live here anymore," she snapped, not even trying to fake civility. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The officer stepped forward and handed Alan the copy of the court order. "We're executing a legal search of the premises. You'll remain here while we check the property. Please do not interfere." Alan's mouth opened, but the words caught. I walked behind them, slower. Every creak of the floorboards waking memories I had folded and stored away like old linens. The officer began with the downstairs, kitchen, closet, then the living room. "Ma'am," he said, kneeling by the couch. "I found something down here." He lifted the skirting and reached in. Wood scraped against wood. And then there it was, the box. He placed it gently on the coffee table. It was dusty, but the brass clasp still caught the light. I unlatched it with a slow breath. Inside, everything I'd feared lost the original deed. The will Joseph had handwritten in blue ink, notarized and witnessed. Our joint bank account forms. Copies of my birth certificate, medical directives, the real ones. And beneath those, folded neatly, a small handwritten note on lined paper. "Move her in by Sunday. No delays. D.S." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't recognize the initials, but I knew what it meant. They weren't waiting. They were coordinating. The officer looked at me. "This changes everything." "Yes," I said, still holding the note. "It does." And now, it was time to protect the one person they hadn't planned for Nate. Alan didn't fight when the officers escorted him out. He kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, that paperwork could explain everything. But the moment his wrists were cuffed, his wife bolted upstairs. A minute later, she came down with a half-zipped duffel bag and fury in her voice. "I didn't know he was doing all that," she snapped as she brushed past me. "I'm not getting dragged into his mess." The house fell quiet after she left. Too quiet for a home that was supposed to hold a child. Nate arrived with the caseworker 20 minutes later, clutching his backpack against his chest like armor. His small face was pale, eyes flicking from room to room as if checking whether the house still belonged to him. Child services set up at the dining table. I sat nearby, far enough not to influence him, close enough that he knew I was there. "Nate," the caseworker asked gently, "where do you feel safe?" He didn't hesitate. "With Grandma." My throat tightened, but I kept still. It wasn't my moment. They continued their assessment school habits, routines, recent changes, what he had overheard in the house. He answered carefully, quietly, but every truth he spoke chipped away at the last pieces of the story Alan had tried to build. When they finished, the caseworker turned to me. "We recommend emergency guardianship. For his safety." It shouldn't have felt like victory, but it did feel like breath. We drove straight to the courthouse. Janelle met us with the completed motion already in hand. The judge reviewed everything, the forged documents, the intake forms, the note in the box, the child's statement, guardian status granted. By the time sunset hit the windows, I held the papers that made me responsible for Nate officially, legally, unquestionably. We returned to the house together. I unlocked the front door, switched on a single lamp, and set my suitcase by the wall. But I didn't unpack. Not yet. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold that pricks your skin, but the kind that settles into your breath, making you speak slower, lower, like your voice doesn't quite belong to you. Alan sat across from me, wearing a suit I'd bought him 5 birthdays ago. He looked smaller somehow, slouched in a way I didn't recognize. His lawyer whispered to him, but he barely moved. He pled stress, Financial burden. Poor judgment. Claimed he'd only meant to simplify things while I was unwell. The judge didn't blink. They read the charges aloud. And each one landed heavier than the last fraud. Elder exploitation. Falsifying legal documents. Attempted unlawful relocation. Forgery. He didn't deny them. Just kept using the word mistake like it could erase months of planning. When it was my turn to speak, I stood with the pages in hand. My voice didn't waver. Not at first. I kept it simple, just the facts. The signatures that weren't mine. The transition file. The forged evaluations. The sheltering of a child who'd been told to fear the safest person he knew. And then I read from Joseph's will. "This house shall remain with Merelda Vaughn," I said slowly, "in body or in trust. For the rest of her natural life." That's when my hand shook. Not from fear, but because it was the first time I'd said those words aloud. The first time they echoed in a room full of people who could enforce them. When I looked up, Alan's eyes were lowered. He didn't meet mine. He just stared at a crack in the courtroom floor like it held a door he could still escape through. But there was no door. Not anymore. The judge tapped his gavel once and denied bond. Alan was remanded into custody pending trial. No fanfare, no outburst. Just a hallway that emptied one quiet step at a time. Outside, Janelle waited with a folded coat and a thermos of tea. I took both without a word, and finally exhaled. Weeks passed in the way healing does, slow, uneven, and quieter than you'd expect. Nate settled into the new rhythm, like it had always been waiting for him. School, books, the occasional late-night thunderstorm that brought him padding to my room with his blanket. I let him stay. Some nights, I needed the company more than he did. One morning, I found him at the kitchen table, tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth in concentration. A sheet of paper lay in front of him, pencil marks crisp and sure. He didn't look up as I poured coffee. "What are you working on?" "Sweetheart?" He turned the paper around. A house, drawn in square simplicity, a swing set in the yard, two stick figures holding hands beneath a sun with lines too many to count. "It's us," he said. "You and me." I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I stood, walked to the hallway, and opened the closet where my suitcase still leaned unmoved since the day I returned. I unpacked. Not quickly. Not all at once. But piece by piece. Drawer by drawer. My clothes in the bureau. My books on the shelves. A photograph of Joseph by the lamp in the living room. Just where it had been before. The house felt different. Not because of what was removed, but because of what was allowed to return. Nate's shoes by the door. His laughter from the other room. Mail addressed to me in my handwriting, not someone else's. A pantry filled with things I actually eat. No one rearranging the towels to their liking. No voice telling me I was forgetful. The front garden was still wild. I hadn't touched it yet, but I would. That afternoon, I opened the front windows. The breeze moved through the house like something released. It carried the scent of soil and fallen leaves, of time spent waiting and finally moving forward. I stood in that moment, not reclaimed, not rescued, just home, and I knew exactly where the swing set would go.